Good morning, Rechavia Nachlaot in Yerushalayim. Thank you for joining us for our Monday morning class in Chassidut in English. And yesterday we started the third chapter in the portion of Tanya called Sha'ar, ha-Yichud ve'emunah, the gate of oneness of Hashem and faith in Hashem. And we are continuing now. Yesterday we established pretty strongly that the entire world is really nothing. I know that's a very strong statement, but it's simple logic. 1 + 1 = 2. If the entire world, every single object in the world, is totally dependent on Hashem's existence, then it's not an entity for itself. It's not an illusion. It's just it's not a true entity. It's an entity. It's just not a true entity, because the moment that Hashem can take away His godly, His spirituality and godly spark from that object, then the object ceases to exist. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to bring an example, because we have a rule, like the verse states, "Mibsari echazeh Eloka." From my own flesh, I can see God. Echazeh means I can see, but there are other ways that the verse could have stated, "Mibsari er'eh Eloka." From my flesh, I will see God. It's a much clearer level of vision to see than echazeh. Echazeh means to grasp. It's more like a materialistic type of vision rather than a clear, sharp vision. And the explanation is because when we try to give an explanation for concepts in godliness from the mundane world, or from looking at ourselves, trying to understand Hashem, then there isn't really a way to truly give a good example, a good comparison, because Hashem is Ein Sof. Hashem, there's no end, there's no limit to Hashem and His greatness. So by virtue of mathematics, it's impossible to give a real example for Hashem. Therefore we say, Mibsari echazeh Eloka. I can have a blurry vision. I can have some kind of grasp, very, very minor, not a clear re'iyah, lir'ot. It's not a clear vision. Rather, it's very general, very... And so the same thing applies to the concept of an example in Chassidut, a parable. On one hand, the reason why we're bringing a parable, a metaphor, is because the metaphor is supposed to give us an indication and an explanation into the concept that we're trying to explain. So usually, a metaphor gives a good example, gives a good explanation. In fact, we learned last week that Shlomo HaMelech would give 3,000 metaphors. And it wasn't just 3,000 different metaphors, it was 3,000 different levels. That's a major accomplishment. That's a true genius, to be able to bring down a very deep concept, many, many levels, and each one is lower than the next. That has to be really, really calculated properly. But when it comes to Chassidut, when it comes to trying to explain a concept, at least how much more so a very, very refined concept in Chassidut, then it's almost impossible to have a proper metaphor. So what's the point of bringing a metaphor? The point is that we should be able to have at least some kind of understanding, some kind of small percentage of an appreciation for the concept that we're trying to explain. All this was an introduction to what we're going to explain now. The Alter Rebbe brings a mashal, brings a metaphor, so that we should be able to understand the huge gap between Hashem and His greatness and between the human being or every finite object in the world. And how is it exactly or basically, that Hashem, on one hand, creates everything, on the other hand, the object is not really in existence, so to speak, because the object simply is totally dependent on the spark of godliness. So let's read it inside. In your text of the original text of the Tanya, it is none other than page 150, well, it's the page corresponding to 154. On top of the page, on the left side of Perek Gimel, is Ayin Chet, which is 78. And pretty much smack in the middle, a drop lower than the middle of the page, the first word of the line is Bilado. And now we're on the third word of the line, which is V'hamashal. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to bring an example that we say that the creations of the world, even though they seem in our eyes to be sort of a real entity, a yesh, but in truth, they're really nothingness. V'hamashal zehu or hashemesh. The metaphor is the light of the sun. Hameir la'aretz v'ladarim, which shines for the land, for the world, and its inhabitants. In other words, even before we get into the metaphor, the closest that we can come to understand godliness and spirituality is by the concept of light and fire. Light and fire are on some level physical, but they're the most spiritual around. You see it, you can't really touch it. I guess you could feel the heat. No pun intended. You could feel, but I don't think it's really you're not really feeling the fire. I wouldn't suggest, don't try that at home, to put your finger through the fire, but you don't really feel anything. Maybe you feel the wind of the fire jumping upward, but it's really spiritual. It's light. It's very hard to have. It's not tangible. It's hard to have a materialistic relationship with it. And so the sun is high, removed from us, extremely hot, and it brings a lot of light to the world. So the ray of the sun, let's continue in the text, Shahu Ziv, which is the ray, the extension, V'or, and the light, Hamit Pashet Miguf HaShemesh, which spreads around from the sun globe, V'nireh, and this light seems to be, to someone who looks on it from this world, La'ein Kol, to the eye of anyone that's looking at it, Kefi shehu me'ir al ha'aretz u'b'chalal ha'olam, as it shines on the world, on the land, and on the world. So what do we have here? We're looking at the ray of the sun. It's impossible for us to look at the sun globe itself. We would simply, it's just impossible to see it. What we see is the ray of the sun. So, Vihine, let's continue. Vihine, and behold, Ze Pashut, it's clear and certain, Sha'ar v'ziv Hashem hazeh, Yeshno gamken beguf v'chomer kadur hashemesh shebashamayim. Simple logic, that this light and ray that comes out of the sun, is also found inside the sun globe. Are you following? We see the ray of the sun. We can't look at the sun globe. We cannot see the sun globe itself. We only see the ray of the sun. Now the question is there also the ray of the sun inside the sun globe itself, or is it only an extension from the sun? So it's simple logic that the ray is not only something that comes out of the sun globe, but on some level is also inside the sun globe. You have to understand that there are two concepts. This might seem a little bit lofty, but it's really important that we understand this, because this will give us the best type of understanding, the best understanding into godliness and the way Hashem runs the world. There are two concepts, and let's not confuse between the two. We have the or, the light, and then we have the ma'or. In Hebrew, which is such a beautiful language, every single letter, every single vowel, the way you say the word, milara or mila'el, do you put a focus on the first part of the word, the last part of the word, is punctual. Every single thing is punctual. And so, for practical purposes, there really is not a difference between the ma'or and the or. The ma'or is the source of the light. Ma'or. The or itself is the light which comes from the source. So if we're to give an example, you have a light bulb, and the light which comes out of the light bulb. If the light bulb itself would shine without having the ray coming out of the light bulb, then it may not help you to put on the light bulb. Now this is a bad example because the light bulb is not really a ma'or. On a very low level, on a very diluted level, perhaps the sun, the light bulb can be considered a ma'or, a source. But really, the light, the energy of the light bulb, I'm not a scientist, and hopefully some of you can help me out. And if you have something to add, please write in the comments, and I will try to mention them. But to the best of my understanding, every single light, every single ray comes eventually from the sun. The sun is the source of all energy and a source of all light. So, on the micro level, the light bulb is the source for the light which lights up the room. But on the macro, it's only an extension, only part of the ray, which is an extension of an extension of an extension, etc., etc., from the sun. And the sun globe would be called the ma'or, the source of the light. And the ray, the light that shines onto us, which quote unquote comes from the sun globe, that is called the or, the light. And the light spreads around everywhere. It's obvious that the ma'or could not be everywhere. If so, the world would not be able to exist. Because of the intensity of the heat and the light, the brightness of the sun globe, nothing would be able to exist. So Hashem had to put the ma'or, so to speak, of the sun somewhere, I don't know how many millions of miles away. We're going to learn about later on, I believe it's in chapter 7, where the Alter Rebbe gives the number of how, at least he says, how much larger the sun is from the world that we're in. The Rambam talks about how far it is away from the world. And so, the sun, Hashem had to put the sun globe really far away. And we benefit from the sun globe through the light, through the or. So I hope it became clear to us the difference between the ma'or, the source of the light, and the or, and the light itself. So now the Alter Rebbe is saying something very logical. The question is there also light within the sun globe? Or is the sun globe only a ma'or, only a source, and there's no light in there? And the light only begins from the end of the sun globe outward? Or is there also light within the sun globe itself? So the Alter Rebbe says, it's obvious that there is also light within the sun globe. Let's continue in the text. What's the proof for that? What's the simple logic to say that there is light within the sun globe itself? She'im mitpashet umeir l'mirachok kol kach, that if this light of the sun extends and shines so far until our earth, kol shekain, how much more so, sheyuchal laha'ir bimkomo mamash, for sure that in the place of the sun globe, in the source, there's also light. It's a logical thing. If there is light outside and it's so powerful, it's so intense that it's able to have an effect so many millions of miles away, so simple logic is that there is also light within the sun globe itself. Now, practically speaking, before I continue, thank you, Rachel, that you wrote here that the sun is 93 million miles away. Wow. Now, let's get right back into the text. Practically speaking, if you're going to take a knife and cut open the sun globe, so to speak, are you going to be able to differentiate between the source and that which comes out of it? No, you're not going to be able to differentiate. I'm trying to... But nevertheless, there is for sure sunlight inside the sun globe from a logical point of view. I'm trying to think of an example because we don't really have the real concept of ma'or. But let's say, for example, you have a cake. So the cake is, or any food, I'm just taking an example. So you have the cake is delicious. Now, the cake also has something which comes from it. I would suggest the concept of smell, taste. There you have the cake. I'm trying to differentiate between the cake itself, which I'm calling the essence, so to speak, the etzem, and the extension of the cake. It's a bad example because it's a real physical thing, so it's hard to give a real example of something which is an extension of an essence, because we don't really have essence, and it's hard to explain what comes from there. But there's no question that there can be an extension of everything if you dig really deep. So if you take the cake and you cut it open, you will be able to smell the cake really closely. So that's an indication that the smell that was there early, that you felt when you walked into the room before cutting the cake, it was in the cake even before it came out of the cake. Because logically speaking, if something comes from something, it had to be inside there. The problem is, by the sun, that is the highest level of spirituality, pure, clear spirituality, it's not a physical thing. That's much more etzem. It's much more ma'or. It's much more source than anything physical that we can explain. And by Hashem, it's Ein Sof, unlimited times more than the way it is by the sun even. But there's no way to identify the light, the ray that comes out of the sun within the sun globe. It's impossible. The intensity of the sun globe itself is so strong, and it's so refined. It's not a physical thing. It's very, very, very removed from the physical way of looking at things. And so therefore it's really hard to separate, to differentiate between the essence and that which comes out. Therefore, getting back to our scenario, the Alter Rebbe said a logical conclusion that we have to say that there is also sun ray inside the sun globe. Rak. Let's continue inside. Only, however, Shesham bimkomo mamash, inside, over there, inside the literal sun globe, nechshav haziv hazeh la'ayin ve'efes mamash. This ray is considered literally nothingness. Why? Ki hu batel mamash b'mtziut, because it's literally nullified. It doesn't have its own entity. Lagabei guf kador hashemesh, in reference, in comparison to the sun globe of the sun itself. Shahu, for the sun globe itself, it creates makor ha'or v'aziv hazeh. The sun globe creates this light. She'aziv va'or hazeh eino rak he'ara. This light and ray is only a shine, me'ira, that lights to the outside, miguf ve'etzem kador hashemesh, from the sun globe. So since the sunlight is only a ray, is only a shine from the sun globe itself, therefore when it finds itself in the source, you cannot identify it, because it's totally one with its essence. And there's no way to be able to identify the sunlight. Rak b'chalal ha'olam, only in the world. Tachat kol hashamayim v'al haaretz, under the heavens and on the earth. She'ein kan guf kador hashemesh b'mtziut, that we do not have the sun globe itself. Nir'eh kan ha'or v'haziv hazeh shel hashemesh. Over here we do see the light and the ray of the sun. L'yesh mamash, it seems to be like a real entity. L'ein kol, for everyone. V'nofel alav kan shem yesh be'emet. And over here it seems to be really like a yesh. Over here it makes sense to call the sunlight a true entity, because over here it's not in the sun globe. Masha'ein kain, on the other hand, kishahu, when this ray finds itself b'mikoro, in its source, beguf hashemesh, in the sun globe itself, ein nofel alav shem yesh klal, you cannot call it even with the title yesh, the title entity. Rak shem shel ayin ve'efes, it has a new name, nothingness, because there's no way to identify it. Ki be'emet, hu sham, for the ray over there which finds itself within the sun globe, it is truly be'emet. This is a very important word. Be'emet, he is l'ayin ve'efes mamish, nothingness. She'ein meir sham rak mikoro levado, only the essence shines there. There is no light from the essence. Shu guf hashemesh hameir, which is the sun globe itself, which gives light. Ve'efes bilado, and there's literally nothing besides for it. So even though the light which comes from the sun when it's outside, it's clear to us that it finds itself also within the sun itself. Nevertheless, it cannot be considered like a yesh, like an entity. So how is it there? On one hand, you tell me that it's there. On another hand, you tell me that it's nothing. So how can you explain its existence in a way that it's selfless? In other words, it's there, but we cannot tell its existence. The best example for this, there are a number of examples. One example is, they're all connected, but one example is from the moon. The moon is, on one hand, is the moon. It's an entity. On the other hand, the scientists will be able to explain to you, or if anyone here can put in the comments, that the moon is only a reflection from the sun, depending on its direction, the way the sun mirrors off the moon, or the moon mirrors off the sun. That's the angle, how much we see the moon in the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, and the end of the month. So on one hand, we say the moon is an entity. On the other hand, we're saying it's only a reflection from the sun. Or another example is anav, to be humble according to Torah. On one hand, you ask the person to be humble, almost like nothing. On the other hand, you're saying that he has a name, and he has a job, and he has a family, and he has his mind. So if he's really humble, then he should be nothing. He should just be air, no? Humble is nothing. The answer is that a humble person is not someone who's nothing, someone who's trampled on. That's not called humble. That's called ashmata. That's called someone who makes himself like a rag. That's not what Hashem wants. True humility according to Torah is Hashem wants us to be who we are. Hashem gives each and every one of us, every moment of the day, tremendous talents to change the world, to have a strong impact on the world. But we cannot take the credit for ourselves. Someone who says, I'm the big shot, I'm the wise guy, I'm the big charity giver, I'm the unbelievable, I'm the unbelievable, I'm very strong. Just look at my muscles. Then that's misusing the talents that Hashem gave us. Every single thing is totally, exclusively meant to be credited to Hashem. Once we realize that every single thing we have is not ours, is all Hashem's, then we don't take the credit for ourselves. It's like two people mentioned to me over the past few weeks that they want to give a lot of tzedakah, a lot of charity, but they made me promise that no one in the world would know where it came from. So this is unbelievable. This is so remarkable. I am humbled to hear these words. That means that I'm standing in front of a person who's truly humble, who realizes and recognizes that every single thing that Hashem gives them, they cannot take the credit for themselves. So it's very hard to walk along this fine line and to balance between two opposites. On one hand, you're an entity, on the other hand, you're nothing. And if we follow the teachings of the Torah, and especially Chassidus, this gives us direction of how to be truly humble, and how to look at the world as on one hand being an entity, on the other hand being a non-entity, because everything is Hashem. We have a lot of food for thought, and Bezrat Hashem tomorrow we're going to continue this concept. Just before I tell you about tonight's class, I want to mention a couple of things. First of all, thank you to all of you who have already participated in the raffle. Please spread the word and let's get as many people as possible. Second of all, I have a big announcement for this Shabbat. Friday night and Shabbat evening will be in the same place in the parking lot of Mizrahi, and Shabbat morning the 95% that it's going to be the next building over in the parking lot of the Great Synagogue. We have a beautiful shaded area. For this week, we're going to start at 8 o'clock. We'll see how it goes, but it's going to be much, much nicer now because we won't be baking under the sun. And so hopefully that's going to be a great addition to our Shabbat experience. And of course tonight, 7:30, we have our weekly Tuesday evening Chassidut in English, learning about Seriously Happy. It's a great course. Please spread the word so that we're able to have as many people as possible join us on Facebook here and also on Zoom. Toda Rabba, thank you very much. Have a great day, and looking forward to seeing you tonight. Be well.